Hello. All right. Let's get back into this. So first we've got the continuation of this project. So we've got the property, we've got the fence, we've got the inner, the beginning of the house. We're going to continue to model it in the backyard and then of course replicate the section here, which will be a flagstone patio. So what I want is of course the pictures are not where they should be. It's endless technical difficulties. So I need a moment for these to appear. All right. Okay, so I like to reference the pictures, especially whenever I'm doing one of these design projects, because they are a more appropriate way to generate the model. So it's something that is really important whenever you're working with something that's client facing, because you want to be able to convey the idea of what you're designing in a way that is easy for them to digest, so then they can go through the visuals you provide them and say, I like this, or this should be modified, I would prefer if this was different, right? Whatever it is, you can make those changes because they've seen a representation of it. So I need to pull up the pictures here. I should have had them prepared. I had them handy, but not handy enough. At least they're organized. Okay, so now I'm on my corresponding reference folder, and I'm now looking at the shed, which this is going to be. So first things first, this is too high. So we're going to create a pitch right here in the middle, and it's only about a 3-foot rise. Again, this doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be good enough that it looks realistic. And it's not because I like work to be sloppy. Ideally I would make this, perfectly in line, and it would be totally this is about 1 foot on either side. Ideally it would be totally perfect, right? But this is not the focal point of the project. It's more so an ancillary component where, again, we want it to be realistic, but right, of course it doesn't work. So this is actually like a detached garage, although it's going to become a, that's so not how that is supposed to work. Anyway, so this is actually a future art studio, which I love. I love when you have a dedicated detached space like this. I think it really adds a lot of, why is this not snapping? What is going on? I'm having, again, it's the most rudimentary of processes, but it's just so needlessly what the like, there's literally no reason. Like, SketchUp just has a terrible tendency to have these unbelievably inconsistent behaviors. It's very frustrating because, like, now look, it works exactly as it is, and instead of needing to go through that, it just made us do precisely okay, so then we need to add a little bit of a pattern here. But first we're going to do a 1-inch riser just to add some more texture to mimic what's going on there. So we'll raise it out by 0.25 inches. That gives it a little bit more dimensionality, which helps. So then we do want a line. So those windows are actually about the midpoint here. So we're going to go here, draw the line to there, divide the line into, we'll do 5 segments because that will allow us to place, no, we'll do 4 because when I create the geometry here, we'll do 8 inches by about 10 inches. Nope, should be the other way. Okay, so 10 inches. Of course, like, it's so inconsistent. Like, I just typed the measurements right the opposite way, and it's just there we go. That's what I wanted. All right, so we're going to make this a group. Point to 5 again for a little bit of dimensionality. Then this again should have a line. And what we're going to do is make this a component, and I always like to do this so that whenever there we go, now we multiply it by 3, and now we have our windows in. So when we edit this, we can put glass in. Okay, so for whatever reason, that didn't become a component, which is there we go. Okay, so we're gonna fix that texture later, but that gives us a little bit more basis for the garage. And then we're actually going to move these a smidge. There. So now there's not going to be a vexing graphical issue, so we'll continue with this. So there is actually vinyl siding that surrounds the house. We're going to get to that in a minute. But we have a quick adjustment to make here because there's actually a gutter. So that goes roughly to about there and then about there. So that will house the gutter. So then we'll extend that. Boom, there. Okay. So then you do the same thing to the other side. Okay, so that preps us for the next work. Now, there are a couple windows around here, and there are actually some sconces. So we'll get to that in a minute. For the moment, I just want to actually get back to this patio. So this entire area should be about 1,000 square feet. So let's just double check the math. Actually, it's closer to 900. It might get expanded a bit, but it's it's an amount of space that requires a fair bit of uh, so generally when you get materials for hardscape, you want to overestimate the material supply by about 10% to account for breakage or mishaps, things of that nature. So if this is about 900 square feet, then we'll want to order close to 1,000 square feet of, excuse me, hardscape. There we go. Okay. So now we move this back. Let's double check the area. It's not giving us the, there we go, 881 square feet. This is not exactly correct, but it's pretty close. So again, this area is about 900 square feet, you know, with a possible 10% deviation. So we're within that range. So this will actually be flagstone. So I'm using new rendering software, so we're going to try this a little bit differently. But one thing that is going here is actually the fire pit. So let's put that in. And we can find, I'm curious if, okay, so this is pretty similar to the one that is actually already on the property. So one thing we're going to do is maintain the same level of utility, right, that they have. So they have a wood pile right here, and in the future there's a chance to put beehives up in this area. So if we were to generate that now, then we go to the warehouse, the 3D warehouse. This is a great place to get existing models, so I do try to use this whenever possible. So here we go. This is a good option right here. So now we have this beautifully ready-made model with all of the parts. So thank you very much to the author of this. Okay, now this is perfectly in line. Now what we can do is say move this here and then move it there, and then let's say multiply it by 3. 4 beehives, well really that actually be about 12, but yeah, that's pretty good. So we'll throw that in as an extra and say, oh, here's an option for you to visualize what it looks like when you're here. Now I'm going to try to actually share something in OBS, the broadcasting software, to show you what it looks like when we have a okay, so I'm not sure if this is going to work. I'm attempting to show the render, which is not updating at the moment in any event. Okay, so this might not work as well as I was hoping. This might get relegated to later. Okay, so I was going to try to show the render, but I'm going to have to play around with the settings on how to do that later. For the moment, we don't need it. So one of the other things we have to consider is actually the fact that we're going to be putting plants and flowers along the fence here. So I do need to get ready to put them in. And we're going to be doing low maintenance, dog friendly perennials. So this area will receive a smattering of mulch. And then on top of that, we're going to get probably in the ballpark of 50 plants just to start. It's obviously not going to be a permanent endeavor, but we will also do some privacy trees in this area, because then we have one of the primary goals to be targeted, which is to add more privacy, because in reality this is actually a friendship fence. So one thing we do need to do is update this paint, but that can be done with the materials in the other rendering software, so that's not critical at the moment. Right, and that matches the reality a little bit more. Except we need to modify just a bit more. And then we're going to create an array, which is where we actually extend that. And because these are actually live components, each one would affect another. So we have to offset it. And we're going to get this just close enough. Okay, that's adequate. So that mirrors the reality of the fence here. So this is the enclosure, although we do need to put the gate in here. So I'm going to create this once more. And move this here. All right, so okay, so I'll put the gate in here. I'll do that later. But for the time being, you can see what we're working with. So I'll come back and put in this patio here, which should have geometry. I'm not sure why it doesn't. There we are. Okay, this is actually the gate here, at least one of them. So this entire structure should be elevated up by about about 2 feet. So now we have some separation. There are some steps over there. This will be representative. Again, this is actually not perfect as far as the reality of the property is, but again, it's fine. We're not concerned with the deck, the porch, all that. We're concerned with the landscaping. So for example, there's a fairly large Japanese maple here, which is going to get moved here, and then we'll be putting in a magnolia here. So we know some of the plants. We might put in some apple trees in this area. So excuse me. As we build out this model, we want the property to again represent what the nature of this property is. So right now we're putting in the gutter. And this is when I love these live components. So this should be there we are. Okay. I remember it being, what, 18 feet? So I just should have done 18 times 12, which would have been 290. So that gives us the distance, and then I can attach a gutter to this downspout. And then, because this area will actually be flagstone, I almost wonder if there's some sort of flagstone generator. That would be amazing. But we can do something like this in the moment. And very conveniently, they're all already elevated, which makes this far easier. So we're going to replicate this. So something very cool happens when we do this. We explode the groups, and then we can edit all. They didn't make each one a group. That's unfortunate, but not a big deal. No matter, because we can just simply move some of these around, get mostly close enough. And what we're going for again is a representation. Right. I'll come back and tidy this up later, but you can see how we'll actually end up merging everything, and then it will actually feel cohesive. I've actually got to go here in a minute, so I'm going to wrap this up. But the structure begins to take form, right? So then we have a lot of extra geometry here, and this will obviously need to be tightened up, but I'll actually adjust that manually. But okay, so look, we have all these rocks. We can go to stone, And the latest SketchUp update has actually altered this, but obviously these will need to be adjusted so they fit much more congruently. But there, look, now we have the flagstone. This will be shaped. Then we have the garage with a downspout, some beehives, the fence is intact, and we have a depiction of the house. So if we were to enable the shadows, and then let's say also the ambient occlusion, which I believe is, it's tucked away somewhere. There we are. Okay, so ambient occlusion essentially multiplies the massing of shadows within an area where shadows would exist. What that means is when you have a corner, more shadows would naturally accumulate there. So they're not particularly prominent in this example, but they should be there. And it obviously is not realistic, right? This is a very rudimentary mock-up, but you begin to see how it looks. So I'm going to be continuing to work on this later and have very exciting news about some new upcoming opportunities at Eden and Dane. So stay tuned. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.